Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is Tiara speaking. We're glad to have you all here today. We're just going to give it a few seconds for people to join. This is Tiara speaking for those coming in. Thank you for joining us. We are going to give it just a few seconds to allow people to enter into the room. And we are going to get started. Good morning again, everyone. My name is Tiara Yakini, and I am with the Disability Rights and Compliance Division at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights. I will be your moderator for this session. I am a dark-skinned African-American female with curls in my hair, and I am wearing a white top and a black blazer. For full accessibility today, it is critical that speakers first identify themselves by name before proceeding to speak and mute their microphones after they are done speaking. We have ASL interpreters on screen, and live card captioning is available by turning on subtitles using the CC icon on the lower part of the screen. A spotlight will be placed on all presenters and interpreters to view both the presenter and the interpreter along with any presentation materials. Please make sure that the gallery view is selected on your personal device. With that said, I am happy to welcome you to today's program, which we are hosting in honor of National Disability Employment Awareness Month. We are so excited to have Nacsha Ealy and Keisha Dilligard of Michigan Rehabilitation Services with us to talk about the importance of access to good jobs for all. Please join me in welcoming them as they share ways that businesses can create a culture of accessibility to attract and retain talent inclusive of people with disabilities. Nacsha and Keisha, you now have the platform.
Thank you so much, Tiara. This is Nacsha. We appreciate you having us today to present on information related to National Disability Employment Awareness Month. Again, my name is Nacsha Ealy. I'm a woman with brown cat-eye glasses. My hair is braided and swooped off to the left side. I'm wearing a top that is black and pink, and my background is blue with the Leo Labor and Economic Opportunity logo. I work as a business relations consultant with the Business Network Division at Michigan Rehabilitation Services, and we are housed within the State of Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. I'm joined by my colleague who will introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Keisha Dilligard. I work as a business relation consultant with Michigan Rehabilitation Business Network Division, and thank you so much for having us here.
So today we are definitely going to start, in our first topic of conversation is actually defining disability. When we think of disability, most people have their own idea of what that word means, usually based off of their experiences, interactions, and just things that they have learned over time up until they learn what the word disability might actually mean. So when we use the word disability, we are using it as defined by the Americans with Disabilities Act. This law was signed in July 26th of 1990, and the overall purpose was to make American society more accessible to people with disabilities. In 2008, the ADA Amendments Act, or ADAAA, was passed, and the purpose of this act was to broaden the definition of disability, which had been narrowed by US Supreme Court decisions. So in vocational rehabilitation, which is the work that we do, we use the legal definition, as I just explained. And because this is something I want to make sure everyone understands, I'm going to actually read exactly what I have on my slide. So the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA or ADAA, defines a person with a disability as a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. So what exactly is a major life activity? These include things such as eating, sleeping, seeing, hearing, walking, breathing, speaking, learning, sitting, standing, lifting, working. The list could go on, but really these are things that most people do every day and throughout their day. So again, substantial limitations in one or more major life activity. Disability is also defined and includes people who have a record or history of such an impairment, even if they do not currently have a disability. So this could include someone that is in remission from a cancer diagnosis, or someone that is not currently exhibiting symptoms of their diagnosis. For example, they may be diagnosed with lupus or Crohn's disease and it is in a remission. It also includes someone who's currently stable, or the condition is well controlled by treatment, therapies, or other medical interventions. And this could be an example in a diagnosis of something like depression, anxiety, diabetes, or a heart condition. And the last thing that falls into the definition of disability is it includes individuals who do not have a disability, but are regarded or perceived as having a disability. This one can be a little bit harder to understand, but one example of this could be someone has worked for their company for 20 years, and 3 years ago, they had a really, really bad car accident. They were off of work for about a month. People at the job knew about it, cards were sent, well wishes. And since that time, the person has returned to work. So they've been working, doing their job, no issues, no problems, no complaints, and they see an opportunity to promote into a different position. So they apply for the job, they feel they'll be good at it, they meet the qualifications, and someone in the HR department who's been there long enough to know that this person had this car accident a couple of years before, overlooks and passes up that employee's resume because they assume that the employee cannot do the work because they had that car accident however long ago. So then this person has now been overlooked and presumed to have a disability, even if they don't. And that also could lead that person to having protections under the law. As we further talk about disabilities, they can really be broken down into two categories: apparent disabilities and non-apparent. Language around disability has changed over the years. So you may have heard the terms invisible and visible disabilities, or visible and hidden disabilities. So as language changes, we change how we talk about disability. So an apparent disability is typically immediately seen or visible to others. And these can substantially impact and affect a person's life and the activities that they participate in. They can be present at birth or occur anytime over a person's lifetime. A person with an apparent disability may use assistive devices such as a wheelchair, a cane, walker, a scooter. They may have a service animal. It could also be that the person has physical characteristics of a disability. Down syndrome is one diagnosis where you can usually tell that someone has that diagnosis because of physical characteristics. And then we have non-apparent disabilities. These are not immediately seen or visible. And as I mentioned, they have also in the past been called hidden disabilities, but apparent and non-apparent is the language that we're currently using. So these, as I said, are not seen. They typically are not known by just looking at the person. Often they may not be known even when you're interacting with the person. They are often internal. So it could be that someone has a brain injury, a diagnosis of ADHD. They may have a visual disability. They could be hard of hearing. They may have a mental illness even. So with These non-apparent disabilities, the person on the outside interacting with the person with the disability, sometimes might not understand the limitations or barriers that that person may experience because they don't see evidence of the disability in any visible way. And this is one reason why there's still such stigma associated with mental illness. So although a non-apparent disability definitely creates a challenge for the person who has that non-apparent disability, the reality of that disability can be even more difficult for other people to recognize or acknowledge. On the screen, you'll see a list of non-apparent disabilities. And with this list, the goal is just for you to be able to look at what we have displayed as examples. This is not an all-inclusive list. It is not meant to identify every diagnosis you can consider. But if you look at the things that are on the screen, we hope that you can see that these can all be disabilities. We've often been asked, how is fill in the blank a disability? So one example is, how could diabetes be a disability? It can be a disabling condition for one person. It doesn't mean it's a disabling condition for someone else, because all diagnoses are going to have essentially a spectrum of severity and how the symptoms of that show up and how a person actually has functional limitations. So an individual that may have a diagnosis of disability, maybe it is starting to cause problems with their vision. They may have their levels going up and down, so they have to keep snacks around them. It might be impacting their kidneys, so there's the need to use the bathroom more frequently while doctors are trying to figure out what's going on. It may be causing neuropathy, so maybe using their fingers to possibly file or type or do anything that allows for fine motor skills with hands can be impacted. Maybe this person works as a receptionist and is the first person that people see when they walk in and is supposed to be at the front desk and is not supposed to eat at the front desk because of the position they're in. And they have to file and they have to use a computer. Everything I just mentioned would impact that person much more significantly than it might impact someone doing, let's say, some other work or in a different environment. So for that individual, then yes, diabetes does meet the criteria for them of being a disability. So I hope as you look at this list and you think of people in your life, if you think of your own abilities, medical concerns and diagnoses, you can see that any of us could at any point identify ourselves as an individual with a disability, just depending on how it impacts us. And now I'm going to turn this over to Keisha for the next section.
Nacsha, thank you for discussing the topic of disability. Hello again, my name is Keisha and I'm speaking. I will be discussing some statistics and some prevalence of disability. So next slide, please. It's important if we are thinking about employment and maintaining individuals with disabilities, what do we look like in terms of within the United States, and what do we look like in Michigan in terms of numbers? And we all know that no presentation is a great presentation without some statistics, right? So disability impacts all of us. Perhaps you are a person with a disability, you have a family member, a friend, or even a colleague. So according to the CDC, 1 in 4 individuals in the United States have a disability. We can agree that over the course of our lifespan, we will develop some form of a disability. Michigan, smaller population, yet in Michigan, still 1 in 4 adults have a disability. So once again, any one of us can join this group at any time across our lifespan. Next slide, please. So Earlier, Nacsha mentioned there is still a lot of stigma associated with mental illness. This stigma is largely associated with misunderstandings of the limitations caused by mental illness. There is no evidence of seeing the disability. You heard her talk about non-apparent. This is a non-apparent disability, therefore leading to ongoing stigma associated with mental illness. Now, when we're thinking about building an inclusive workforce, you see the statistics that are on the screen here. 1 in 5 U.S. adults experience mental illness. 1 in 20 experience serious mental illness. Now, the next statistic is really important and passionate to me because as we work with youth, we also need to understand that they need resources as well. 17 of our youth, ages 6 to 17, experience a mental health disorder. So when we're looking at employing our youth, also keep in mind they need resources as well. Next slide, please. So when you think about mental illness and work, some individuals feel they do not have a mental illness or a disorder. Maybe it's not one of the high mental illnesses that's usually marketed on commercials or within some of the news that we hear about. No, I don't have a mental illness or disorder. I don't have schizophrenia, or I don't have bipolar disorder, or some other mental illness. But I want to tell you this. Actually, anxiety and depression are among the most commonly diagnosed mental health conditions. They are the top two conditions that are provided medication. Many employers with managed care health plans do cover medication for these conditions, and they often see higher prescriptions for anxiety and depression medications compared to others. This reflects both the prevalence of these disorders and the need for effective treatment options. The focus on mental health has increased in recent years, leading to greater awareness and hopefully better support for those who are affected. Nacsha?
Thank you, Keisha. So this is Nacsha speaking. As we move on to the next section of this presentation, we really want to provide tips for creating a culture of accessibility and inclusivity in the workforce. Oftentimes, there may be an awesome HR person or DEI person or maybe even the president of a company that wants to implement and initiate inclusivity practices and accessibility practices within their organization. And sometimes those great ideas are awesome. And sometimes they filter down to the frontline workers and managers. And it just is a great way to change the culture in a business. But we all know that our world is not perfect, and that does not always happen. Sometimes it might be one lone manager who's trying to implement change, and it's not really going anywhere. Or it might be a frontline employee or a frontline worker, and that information is not traveling up. So we hope in this section to give you some information and to talk about inclusive workplaces, just so you can hear what it could look like for your organization, and also think of inclusivity and accessibility under the realm of disability, but also other protected classes. So if we consider the intersectionality of a workforce and what that could potentially look like, yes, someone may have a disability, but if you see all the things on the screen, there are so many other characteristics of that person that need to be taken into account. So it does not mean that this employee A has a disability and employee A only wants to be around, interact with, and talk to people that have a disability also. We also need to consider all these other intersections, right? So employee may have a disability, but they also have military experience. They have a certain level of education. They have a certain family status. They have certain hobbies. They have religions that other people might be interested in. So just like everyone else, disability can't just be this one little box that we place people in for an inclusive workforce. We really need to see inclusivity across all areas. Sometimes I've talked about inclusivity and people are actually like, well, what does, fertility have to do with anything? And if you think about that in the society we live in now, there are people that have fertility issues, so they may not be natural parents to the children that they have. For some people, that can be isolating, that they have adopted children or they are a foster parent. And that in itself can make it feel like I was invited to the party, but I wasn't asked to dance. So that feeling of being removed or on the outside or not belonging falls into so many different categories that we really have to get to know whomever, our employees, our coworkers, our colleagues, people in our community on all aspects of who they are and not just one piece that we can see or one thing that we think we may know. So this inclusive workforce is really comprehensive, disability being one piece, but don't exclude all the other aspects of a person with a disability because the focus is only on disability. So anyone, whether you have a disability or not, is bringing a total package of a person when they show up. And a person with a disability also brings that package when they show up. As we consider what it looks like for a business and what they are doing and how they are trying to maybe change their culture to be more accessible, to be more inclusive, there's a couple of questions I think you might want to ask yourself. Some organizations feel, and I've heard, they've said it to me, oh, we don't hire individuals with disabilities. They couldn't work here. How are they going to be able to fill in the blank in this type of setting? And my rebuttal to that is always, I'm sure you already have individuals with disabilities. They may not tell you, or you might not see it, but I'm sure you have people that work with you that have disabilities. I love to bring up a good statistic. So like Keisha just mentioned, I might say, did you know in Michigan and across the country, 1 in 4 people have a disability? You might not be able to see that disability, but it is there. And because people have their perception picture of what a disability looks like or what they think it is, I will mention things like, well, if you've ever gone to the doctor and maybe now you're taking medications for something you didn't even know was an issue, and maybe right now it is okay, it's not an issue. Let's use high blood pressure, for instance. It's stable, medication's working. But what about if it doesn't work? What is that going to look like? High blood pressure can lead to a lot of other things, including stroke. So if you're not taking care of yourself and following doctors' things, and that is a result of that condition, do you feel like that might be disabling to you? Could that be a limitation to the work that you do? And the answer is often yes. So helping a business understand who you already have working with you. And some businesses already do this through, because they're federal contractors or subcontractors, they already have to document and have self-disclosure campaigns and things like that. But every business does not. So how do you create a culture that even if you cannot ask, you can't just ask someone if they have a disability, do not do that. But how do you create that culture of a belonging regardless of ability? And those are some things to kind of think about. Who do you already have working with you? What are you doing to make it more inclusive, just for anybody to feel comfortable there? Some of that actually speaks to how you market what you do, how you engage with the community, and your reputation to individuals who do have disabilities, whether they work for you or are your customer base. So some things to consider. Are there any disability-related obstacles to new or current employees? So this is a great way to kind of start thinking about accessibility and inclusivity in your workplace. Can your customer base, can your employees navigate the building or facility? Is it accessible? Are there obstacles to the hiring process? Are there obstacles in trying to promote within the organization? You know, do you use universal design? Is everything from a reasonable accommodation request? How comfortable are your current employees with discussing disability with either their manager or the HR department? These could all be obstacles, but once you start to identify what some of those are, then you come up with those solutions to identify how to reduce those obstacles. Is any training needed for your current employees? So I mentioned on the onset of this section that sometimes one person in an organization can have a fabulous idea about how to be more diverse and inclusive, but that doesn't mean everyone is going to agree with it. So what do you need to do as an organization to let your current employees know this is what we're doing? This is important to our business. Here's some information about what we're doing. Here's some training, whether it is training a couple times a year, is it modules, is it in person, is it some type of, awareness like October, National Disability Awareness Employment Month? Do you do something then? So what does it look like to train your employee base that you already have so they understand our business is now going to be much more inclusive and hopefully accessible, and hopefully we can get people who do have differing abilities to work with us. So that training is critical. Are all levels of your management team comfortable with discussing disability employment? I personally feel when you have these conversations, when you have these initiatives, it has to start at the top and filter down. You starting from the bottom up just typically doesn't work, because if I'm a frontline worker and my manager is not on board and doesn't know anything about this initiative, essentially I might get shot down. But if it starts at the C-suite, if it starts at the higher level and the messaging is consistent and the changes are being made to show that this is important to us, it'll have a much better outcome when you get to the bottom. And then consider, what processes do you already have in place? Do you have a reasonable accommodation process? Or is it just, okay, you need this, we'll get it for you? Do you have accessible documents? Are individuals able to apply for positions in several different modalities? Do you have a person that someone can connect with when they're applying for a position or interviewing for a position or onboarding for a position, that they have as a resource to help them with any accommodations or accessible needs that they have? So these are just, again, a couple of things to think about. This really is just a different version of what I already said, but I want to address one thing in specifically. Know your positions. Have up-to-date position descriptions. Know what the essential functions of your jobs are, and have good outlines of performance expectations. Because without that, you may be turning away. A lot of people may not even want to apply for positions that you have that they can do, because the position descriptions are outdated. The essential functions of the job are unknown or convoluted. So this is something you really want to look at. The overall business preparation, though, is phase 1, addressing company culture, which we just talked about. Phase 2, why do you even want a diverse workforce, and having that conversation at the C-suite level. Phase 3 is discovery and communication. Phase 4 is know your jobs. And phase 5, seek community partnerships. So partnering with organizations like Michigan Rehabilitation Services and the Business Network Division. It could be partnering with the Michigan Department of Civil Rights for training and other additional relevant information. So just seeking input to help you as you move into inclusivity and accessibility within your workforce. And then the final thing about these tips is really looking at inclusion, diversity, accessibility, and equity. So with inclusion, who needs to be at the table? Who needs to be in the conversation? And if they aren't, how do you get them there? So with these four factors, inclusion being intentionally ensuring that each person feels valued and connected. Diversity, understanding that even when people appear to be the same, they're different in many ways, which is where those intersectionalities coming in. Accessibility, we want to provide equal access to everyone. And most businesses have a customer base. So this means to your employees and to your customer base. And then equity, treating all members of the community in a fair and just manner. So these are just some things to hopefully think about as you consider making your organization inclusive and accessible. And I'm going to turn this back over to Keisha.
Thank you, Nacsha. This is Keisha speaking. So we want to talk about MRS as a resource. As you heard Nacsha say earlier, seek community partnerships. Now, there are a lot of different partnerships that you could be developing, but I would like to talk to you about MRS and Business Network Division, potential partnerships. Next slide, please. So let's talk about MRS. Well, I won't say MRS. I'll talk about vocational rehabilitation services in Michigan. So the vocational program is a federal and state funded program. And I'm happy to say that we celebrated 100 years in 2020. We will celebrate 105 years come next year. So the journey for the program started with the Smith-Best Act in 1920. This was also known as the Civilian Vocational Rehabilitation Act. And this was a federal program to provide vocational assistance to Americans with physical disabilities. Now, this was significant during that time because we had a lot of people returning from the war, and they wanted to make sure that they had an opportunity to re-engage in society and obtain employment. So then they had the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. A lot of people are familiar with this federal law, which gave more access and rights to individuals with disabilities. It prohibited discrimination against people with disabilities. It also extended some extra money to help with state services, to help with special programming, to help people with severe disabilities. And then you had the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. A lot of people are familiar with WIOA, right? This provided a framework for changes for statewide and local workforce development systems to increase employment opportunities, retention, increase work earnings, and also pay more attention to occupational skill attainment for U.S. workers. It also improved removing some of those barriers to employment for individuals with disabilities, for youth. So you see, every time we are extending and making sure that we're moving closer and closer to being more inclusive in how we are addressing employment. Also, VR is in every state in the U.S. territories and also in D.C. We're servicing over 1 million people every year with a staff of over 25,000. So now that you know in terms of what we look like nationally, let's talk about what we look like in Michigan. Next slide, please. So in Michigan, we're pretty unique in terms of vocational rehabilitation. We have two VR programs. Nacsha and I represent the Michigan Rehabilitation Services, which is the General Service Agency. The General Service Agency serves all individuals with disabilities except individuals who are blind. The Bureau of Services for Blind Persons, known as BSBP, they provide those services to individuals who are blind. Like I said before, VR is very unique in doing this. Every state do not have two VR programs, but we work together often to make sure careers for qualified individuals with disabilities and services to support businesses are being provided. Next slide, please. We provide services to our dual customers. You heard me say earlier, we're providing services to the job seeker, and we're also providing services to the business. So, Michigan Rehabilitation Services, we're divided into two sides of the house. We have our VR, Vocational Rehabilitation Services, on one side of the house that houses our VR counselors who are providing vocational guidance and counseling, assessment, and diagnostics to our job seekers to make sure that they are employment ready, they're receiving training from schools, training programs, and all of these services are available in all 83 counties in Michigan. And with the focus of assisting with preparing for, obtaining, and retaining competitive employment. Now, on the other side of the house is the business side of the house, which is where, once again, Nacsha and I represent. But the others also, we also have registered occupational therapists that are on staff. And we all work together to assist departments and organizations with recruiting because, as I said, on the other side of the house, we have talent, qualified individuals who are ready to work. We also assist with identifying and implementing reasonable accommodations, making sure that a process is developed, a formal process. Maybe you are not sure what accommodations need to be put in place. You have employers and employees who have no idea what to do. We can assist with providing that consultation. What I will say, we are not the ADA police. We're not here to say you're doing something wrong. We are here to assist you where you are and help you get moving in the direction of where you want to be. We assist with consultation, training for ADA, disability awareness, creative trainings like this, and also making sure that we're creating training to assist with creating an inclusive culture. Next slide, please. So you heard me talk about services to individuals. Now, we service students, we service youth, and we service all individuals with disabilities. And within Michigan, we can cover it all with the two agencies that we have, and also with working in partnership in tandem with you. There is no assignment too small or too big. We just want to make sure we are supporting you in the decision that where you're moving to. If you're interested in youth, we can support that. Students, we work with the high schools, and we also work with everyone of any age from 16 on up. Next slide, please. So focusing a little more on business services, that's the other side of the house. Remember, I talked to you about that just a few minutes ago. So when we're talking about adding value to the business and workforce, these are some of the services. This is not all inclusive of the services that we can assist with. You heard me talk about talent development, talent acquisition earlier. We can definitely assist with that. Connection to partner assets and services. Although we are a phenomenal team, there are some things that we cannot do, but we have developed great connections and partners within the community to assist us to do that nice, warm handoff and saying, hey, we can't do this, but can you assist this business or this organization with this? And those partnerships have been great within the community. Accommodation services, as I said before, maybe you want to develop an accommodation process and you're not quite sure where to start. We can help with that. Also, making sure that if you receive an individual who needs an accommodation and you're not quite sure or what it should look like, what the steps should look like, we can provide that consultation as well and walk you through the process. When you're looking at risk management, we have had our occupational therapist team develop stretching programs for businesses. Maybe you're seeing an increase in injury as it relates to how individuals are doing the job. We can come in, evaluate that, and come up with alternative ways to do the job that's not messing with production, just making sure that production is still the same or increase, and making sure that your workforce is safe. Maybe someone has been injured on or off the job and they're ready to return to work and you're not quite sure what that return to work should look like. There are services for that as well. And then the ADA services. I talked about that a little earlier too, making sure that you understand we are here as a support and a resource for all ADA services. And I thank you, and I'm going to turn it over to Nacsha.
Thank you, Keisha. So if you're here listening, you might say or think, why does this even matter? Why is this even a topic of discussion? And why is it so important to have good jobs that are accessible for all? One of the main things, and when I was a counselor, I would say this all the time, that we are all just one accident, injury, or diagnosis from being on the other side of the table. So as we age, this comes into play, but also people have car accidents. And if they're really bad, they can cause a lot of damage. These are stats from 2023 that are on the screen now. There were 287,953 total crashes in 2023, with 71,085 of those causing injuries. So if you think of that alone, that is one reason why this is important. We never know what is going to happen to someone just as they're in the world and doing things and living. So the accident piece of this is one, but there are also other situations and things we need to think about. What about when we have non-fatal injuries and illnesses in the workplace? Now, in 2020, I think this is the perfect example of how that looked at that time. There was a lot of people who maybe didn't even make it back to work because they had fatal repercussions of the pandemic. And then some people who have returned to work, whether it was their current employer or a new one, now have ongoing challenges because with their own health because of the impact of COVID-19. Then you have people who just get hurt on the job, falling off of ladders, repetitive motion injuries, those musculoskeletal problems that a lot of people face and probably don't even consider it an issue because they just deal with it. You know, sciatica, pinched nerves in the back, or degenerative disc disease, carpal tunnel. These are still workplace, could be considered workplace injuries. If you're in a building that doesn't have good respiration and ventilation, you might have a respiratory condition. So all of these things make it much harder for people to obtain and maintain work. And this is while they're working. We all want to take advantage of our free time and have fun in our communities, but there are sports and recreation related injuries. The CDC estimates that 3.5 million sports related injuries happen each year in the US. And if you add things like, I don't know, somebody trying to relive their glory days on the basketball court one weekend, maybe with their teenagers, and, you know, now they tore an Achilles tendon and they're going to be off of work for a certain amount of time. that is a sports-related injury, but what are the long-term impact or long-term effects of that? So I think these are the things that we often don't even think about, but it all makes sense. It all matters because we're all one injury, diagnosis, or accident away from potentially being someone with a disability. And the biggest thing is we have 5 generations working in the workforce, and we have an aging workforce. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was 20, I had I don't know, maybe 2 diagnoses when I went to my medical appointments. Files like this thick, maybe 2 inches thick. Now I go to a doctor's appointment and I have 2 diagnoses plus about 6, 7 more. Treatment for this, therapy for that, medication for that. My file has to be held with 2 hands when they come in, metaphorically, because everything's electronic now. But you get what I'm saying. As we age, things change. Our bodies change. We get more diagnoses. We have more challenges we have to deal with. And if we're aging and working longer, whether you are, a retired individual who's come back to work because they need or want to, or you're someone who's just been working all the way through, these are all things we have to consider in our world today, in society today. And with that also, with the multi-generational workforce, we have to think of the perception of disability with that multi-generational workforce. You have a lot of younger employees who are much more accepting, much more accommodating, much more accessible, are open to working with, interacting with individuals with disabilities. And sometimes older generations or other generations are not. So then that's a whole nother issue in the workforce. But this all matters because we're all working, we're all aging, we all will be outside of our office and homes to do things. We can, if we're in a car on the street and something happens, if we're at work and now we're having back issues because of our chairs and desks and heights of things, all of this matters. And I will say it one last time, we are all one accident, injury, or diagnosis from being an individual with a disability if we aren't already one. So this is important information to have. It's important information to know. It is important information to plan for so that as a business, as a coworker, as a colleague, as a manager, we need to really have these conversations. So when things come up, we feel that we can tackle the conversations. And if we don't feel comfortable, at least have resources to assist our organization, our managers, our employees when these things arise. So Keisha and I thank you for the opportunity to present today. My goal when I present is always to hopefully plant at least one seed of change or one seed of information. And what you do with that is up to you. So I hope that at least one person out of all that we're here took and is taking one thing away from today's conversation. We're going to pass it over to Tiara.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you both so much for your presentation and for highlighting the importance of access to good jobs for all. Right now, I want to make sure that we have time to get to any questions that our viewing audience may have. And so we are going to open up the floor for questions. I first want to say that I have been a state of Michigan employee for over 15 years, and I was not aware of MRS as a resource until earlier this year when I met you, Nacsha, and you, Keisha. And so I thank you both for sharing this information. I think it's great to provide the resources that are available that many of us do not even know are available to us. I did see a message in the chat of people asking for your contact information. What is the best way that people can get in contact with MRS, whether they are an individual or a business, if they're looking for resources and support?
This is Nacsha. I guess it could start with us for businesses, especially. And if it's an individual customer who's seeking support, we can connect them to the district office that they would need to work with. So our information is a good start.
This is Tara speaking. Thank you, Nasha. I see that we have another comment in the chat, and I do want to encourage our viewers to please place your questions in the Q&A function so that I do not miss it. But the question is, are your services for blind persons as well?
Yes. So Keisha mentioned that we have our sister agency, the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons. At Michigan Rehabilitation Services, we work with individuals with all disabilities up to, there's a formula they use at BSBP, low vision. And if someone is more significantly experiencing a visual disability, then if they're started with MRS, we would transfer them over or refer them to the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons. But the Bureau of Services for Blind Persons exclusively works with those who have a visual disability in addition to any other disability. And I'm not sure if a resource or anything is going out, but we can provide their contact information also.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you so much, Nasha. We do have a question in the Q&A that says, has the perception of anxiety and depression changed to reflect its seriousness, or is it still viewed as just a get over it kind of deal by employers? And so they're asking a question about those visible versus invisible or apparent versus non-apparent disabilities that you mentioned earlier.
Keisha, do you want to take it or you want me to? Oh,
You
okay. So I think that all depends. There's not it's changed and it's accepted, or it hasn't changed and it's not. It really depends on the organization itself. Some organizations are taking it more seriously. They have implemented more mental health incentives, whether it be what is it, mindful Monday or Wellness Wednesday, or their employee resource groups may have a like mental health and mindfulness type of ERG or resource group for employees to participate in. So I would say it really depends on the organization itself, which is why to me that marketing piece is really important. Because if I'm looking for a job and I look under employee benefits and I see something about wellness or, some companies are now given mental health days, that would make me believe that they really are committed to making sure we have an overall really healthy employee work base, even if it means you have to take a day off because you are stressed out. So some people, and I'll put it this way too, some organizations are shifting that way, but some managers or some people within organizations still have that just get over it kind of mentality. So it really does depend. And sometimes you won't know until you have to have that conversation or have that discussion.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you for that response. And I will say that here at the Michigan Department of Civil Rights and the Disability Rights and Compliance Division, we are pushing for more awareness as well through forums such as the one that we are hosting today. And so hopefully people will begin to realize that mental and physical disabilities are covered under the ADA and
Yes.
their protections. Our next question is, this is more of a comment by someone that says, my sarcastic personal favorite with regard to job descriptions is when they require a driver's license, even though the job has nothing to do with driving outside of a commute to and from work. Can either of you say anything more about developing job descriptions in a more thoughtful way?
So this is Keisha. One of the things we have to get away from the job descriptions is making sure that we're reviewing them. Does the job require a driver's license? If the answer is no, remove it. Because remember, the job descriptions can either get you the right candidate, prevent you from getting the right candidate, or just eliminate so many great potential candidates. So you want to make sure that you are listing the job, the essential functions of the job, just to make sure that you're getting the right candidate. And oftentimes, employers are not sure how to do that. How do I create that job description? And we can assist with doing worksite evaluations to list out those job descriptions, provide a draft. You can say, no, that's not it. And we can work with you with getting a great job description. But that's essential. It really is. And I saw that comment and I kind of chuckled. I was like, that's right. If it does not require a high school diploma, don't put it. So just look at what's needed to complete the job.
This is Tara speaking. Thank you for that, Keisha. Our next question is, what are accommodations employees can request with an ADHD diagnosis? And so it looks like they're looking for some examples and whether there is a public list or resource that can assist them.
So this is Keisha, sorry. You did a lot of talking, so I thought I would step in. This is Keisha. So when you're looking at providing accommodations, there is no list. And that's what I would like to start off by saying. You have to figure out what is the barriers and the functional limitations that that particular individual is struggling with, because that is so important. Because once you meet one individual with a disability, you've only met one individual with a disability. There is no cookie cutter accommodation that will fit for any diagnosis of a disability. So what I would say is you have to first understand, what is that person struggling with? And then being able to review what can be put in place to help that individual overcome that or remove the barrier to allow them to have access or allow them to be able to do the essential functions of the job.
This is Tara speaking. Thank you for that, Keisha.
Can I add one thing to that?
Sure.
Ask Jan is a great resource to even start to see what an accommodation could be. But really the person saying, okay, this is what I have problems doing because of my diagnosis. And those are the functional limitations. And once you can figure that out, I have problems paying attention because of my ADHD diagnosis. I have problems finishing a task because of my ADHD diagnosis. Once you can have that list of what the challenges are, then at least you can start to consider what are some solutions for those challenges. But identifying what are the actual challenges is, to me, the first step.
So Tiara, this is Keisha. Just a quick one. I see someone put in the chat about the MRS application. What I would suggest is complete the application. There is a MRS office locator on our website. You can locate the location where you can send your completed application, and it's done by your zip code. And I hope that helps.
This is Tiara speaking. Thank you, Keisha. We are at our time for today. We still have so many great questions in the chat. What I will do is see if we can gather those questions and collaborate with our wonderful speakers here today to get answers for you all. But as we close, I just want to give thanks again to both Nacsha and Keisha on behalf of the Michigan Department of Civil Rights for their time and the information that was shared. We hope that those watching are inspired to create more welcoming and inclusive work environments for the benefit of all. If you are interested in learning more about the work of the Disability Rights and Compliance Division, please visit the Michigan Department of Civil Rights website at www.michigan.gov/MDCR. Thank you all again for joining us, and hopefully we will see you again next time. Thank you.
Thank you.